As we approach another season of Lent this year, some of us may be wondering just what is Lent? What does the word itself mean? And has it always been a part of the church's liturgical year? Those are great questions, and to answer them we really need to dig into a bit of the history of the church. The term Lent sounds a little like lend and a little like lint, but it has nothing to do with either of those terms. Lent comes down to us from an old German word meaning spring. Actually, the word is related to our English word long, which makes sense because in the spring the days get longer. The purpose of Lent has always been the same through 2,000 years of history. It is a time for us to turn away from the distractions of the world so we can better appreciate what Jesus did for us on the cross and better celebrate his victory over death. The practice of Lent goes back to the earliest days of the church's history. In the writings of the 2nd century church father, Saint Irenaeus, we have a very interesting quote. Concerned about different churches and how they were observing Lent differently, Irenaeus writes, "The dispute is not only about which day, but also about the length of the fast. Some think they ought to fast for 1 day, some for 2, others for still more." And then he adds this, "Such variation in the observance did not originate in our own day, but very much earlier in the time of our forefathers." So 3 things are clear from this earliest surviving reference to the practice of Lent. That it involved fasting, that it started with the apostles, and there was no standard practice of it in the 2nd century. Now, things changed by the time we get to the 4th century. Under Emperor Constantine and the Edict of Milan in 313, Christianity was made the official religion of the land. And between the 2 great ecumenical councils, Nicaea in 318, Constantinople in 381, theologians like St. Athanasius and St. Cyril hammered out guidelines for a more uniform practice of Lent. And it was in this period that Lent as a 40-day observance became the standard. So why 40 days? The number 40 shows up quite often in the Bible. In fact, if we were pressed to identify God's favorite number, 40 would be a pretty good guess. In Noah's day, God caused it to rain 40 days and 40 nights. Israel spent 40 years in the desert before entering the Promised Land. Goliath taunted Israel's armies for 40 days before David killed him. I could go on. Now, the Bible nowhere assigns any specific meaning to the number 40, but clearly there is a pattern here that the church imitates when it sets aside 40 days every year for Lent. Of the many uses of the number 40 in the Bible, there is one that is most closely associated with the 40 days of Lent. It's the time Jesus spent in the wilderness after his baptism and before his public ministry. We're told that for 40 days Jesus fasted, that he was tempted by Satan, and that angels came and ministered to him. The church decided that since Jesus spent 40 days in the desert preparing for his ministry, we too should spend 40 days preparing to celebrate his resurrection. So the next decision the church had to make was how Lent would be observed. Fasting was always a part of Lent, but there was a variety in how it was practiced. Pope St. Gregory in the 7th century recommended going vegan during Lent. "We abstain from flesh," he said, "and from all things that come from flesh, like milk, cheese, and eggs." In later centuries, fish was allowed during Lent, and later still, meat was thought to be okay, except on Ash Wednesday, at the beginning of Lent, and on Fridays throughout Lent. Today, the emphasis in Lent is less on giving up something, and more on what you can take up that will bring you closer to Christ. More on that in our next video. For newarter.com, I'm Dr. Tom Carr. May the grace of God dissipate your darkness, enlighten your mind, and inflame your heart.